Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for our Lunch and Learn presentation, Food Sensitivities, Exploring the Intersection of Inflammation, Gut Permeability, and Immunity, sponsored by KBMO Diagnostics and presented by Dr. Robert Silverman. Dr. Silverman was a chiropractic doctor, clinical nutritionist, national international speaker, and author of Amazon's #1 bestseller, Inside Out, and founder of CEO of Westchester Integrative Health Center. The ACA Sports Council named Dr. Silverman Sports Chiropractor of the Year in 2015. His extensive list of educational accomplishments includes 6 different degrees in clinical nutrition. Dr. Silverman is on the advisory board for the Functional Medicine University and is a seasoned health and wellness expert on both the speaking circuits and within the media, as well as a frequent health expert contributor on national blogs such as Consumer Health Digest. He has appeared on Fox News Channel, Fox, NBC, CBS, ABC, The Wall Street Journal, and Max News. He was invited as a guest speaker on Talks at Google to discuss his current book, Inside Out Health. A frequently published author in peer-reviewed journals and other mainstream publications, Dr. Silverman is a thought leader in his field and practice. Dr. Silverman was the principal investigator on a level 1 laser FDA study, and his new book, Superhighway to Health, is expected to be published in January 2021. It is my pleasure to turn the presentation over to Dr. Robert Silverman.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited about imparting some interesting information on food sensitivities. I'm just going to get my share screen up, if we could do that. There we go. That was my little miscue. Terrific. So for me, food sensitivity is a tremendous interest of mine because...
Dr. Silverman, my apologies for interrupting. We're not able to see your screen.
Okay, let's see if we can go back to that now. Let's see. Let's go back into the Zoom watch. Let's see. Can you see it now?
No, you'll need to share your screen from the Zoom bar.
That's video. Okay. Looks like we lost it. Let's share it again. That's my mistake, everybody. Sorry about that. And you should see it now. How's that?
Yes, thank you.
Terrific. Sorry about the little technical difficulties. Staying at home can throw you really off. But in any case, really want to talk about food sensitivities. I'm a big proponent in testing for food sensitivities, isolating them, and really elucidating to a lot of my patients that they have a food sensitivity, because I believe that it is a trigger for the intersection of what we like to refer to as inflammation, gut permeability, and immunity. So my objectives are very clear. You saw them before. I want to explore the role of different food sensitivities in the inflammation cascade and gut permeability. I'd love to delve into the function of what we call the CD3 testing and food sensitivities. I'd like to discuss the value and benefits of early food sensitivity testing with patient compliance and outcomes. And I really want to emphasize the idea of early food sensitivities. I think sometimes as practitioners, as we have an interplay with patients, we wait too long to set a baseline. And I do believe that food sensitivities are a great baseline. And lastly, I'd love to investigate the role of inflammation as root cause in chronic conditions, or if you will, root cause resolution. So let's go through some definitions. Let's be clear on some of the definitions so we're using the same nomenclature. So what are the differences between food allergy, food sensitivity, and food intolerances? When we talk about food allergies, as most allergists discuss, we're talking about an IgE-mediated reaction A food sensitivity, as we'd like to define it, is also immune mediated, but it's not an IgE reaction. That is, we don't want to get on the wrong side of the allergist, so we can have these civil conversations regarding reactions to food. A food intolerance is not an immunological reaction to a food. So essentially what we're seeing is a food allergy is without question, a type 1 hypersensitivity. So you're going to get a reaction virtually immediately. Food intolerance, as we said earlier, is a non-immunological reaction to a food, sort of like a lactose intolerance. The food sensitivity is a reaction to food, which is typically IgA or more so IgG mediated, and it's delayed hypersensitivity. Probably will say this a few times. It can be the symptoms coming up to 72 hours afterwards. And that's why food sensitivities are so interesting, in that most patients don't understand or realize the cause and effect that they have. They may have a food sensitivity. So the FIT test, which we're really going to detail today, is an immune complex formation. So as you see, food and additives can enter the gut. They allow for the formation of inflammatory fragments of dietary proteins. They can actually release of tight junction proteins in the opening of tight junction proteins. We're going to make note about these tight junction proteins, i.e. zonulin. So the tight junction proteins are a critical element because when they open, obviously now we have increased intestinal permeability, or the vernacular for the typical populace would be leaky gut. We then move on to the passage of specific peptides. One of the worst things that can pass through the tight junctions is undigested food particles. And that leads to dietary peptides, and tight junction proteins are presented to APC. We then get a release of TNF alpha, obviously an inflammatory marker, leading to the presentation of antigen to T lymphocytes, cell-mediated immunity, ultimately the presentation of antigens to B cells, leading to production of ABS against tight junction proteins, going down a path ultimately leading to an immune complex. These immune complexes are deposited in tissues. You get a complement activation leading to inflammation and symptoms. We are in the FIT test not only measuring the upstream in terms of exposure via IgG 1 through 4, but also the downstream, the alternative pathway, which is pointed at when the complement is activated, leading to inflammation and, of course, symptomology. Some brevity on the idea of immunity. What's most interesting in immunity is that you've got this idea that food sensitivities can actually affect the adaptive and innate immune system. So we really have three specific parts of our immune system. As we all know, we have our barriers, which are skin and our mucous membranes, stomach acid and digestive enzymes, beneficial bacteria. An innate immune system, very simply, is one arm, which everybody has. An acquired or adaptive immune system comes on as we age. Our innate immune system is what I like to refer to as our search and destroy. They're neutrophils and macrophages. Our acquired immune system, or our B and T cells, they are recognized and memorized. So the adaptive and innate immune systems, in reference to food sensitivities, both IgE and IgG antibodies are produced in response to protein, sugars, and other type of molecules collectively called antigens that may enter the body versus breathing in, ingestion, or contact with the skin surface. The generalization of antibodies in response to antigens is called the adaptive immunity. The complement, or innate immune system, then amplifies and modulates the adaptive immune system. Food sensitivities result from the production of IgG against various antigens and additives, which then form immune complexes and cause inflammation and various symptoms. So overview of food sensitivities is real simple. Food sensitivities and related diseases affect at least 100 million people worldwide. In the US alone, about 50 million people suffer from food sensitivities at the cost of about $18 billion per year. In general, the prevalence of food sensitivities has increased to more than 50% in adults and 70% more in children in the past few years. Food-related reactions cause a wide variety of illnesses, ranging from skin rashes and headaches to chronic intestinal diseases. Although the symptoms of food sensitivities may differ from antigens from food, food additives, or environmental sources, they can all cause the production of antibodies or interact with the mucosal lining and stimulate T cells. We're really still not sure why the immune system's overstimulated, but what is extremely clear now is that an intact intestinal microflora is important in preventing damage to the mucosal and the subsequent generation of what we like to refer to again as leaky gut, which may cause food sensitivities and the alteration of chemical messengers in the gut to brain axis. So 90% of sensitivities are really allotted to 8 food groups: milk, soy, eggs, wheat, peanuts, tree nuts, fish, and shellfish. All or one and all foods in specific groups may cause food sensitivities. Delayed food sensitivities occur hours or days after food ingestion, and delayed food sensitivities caused by IgG 1 through 4 and immune complexes that activate the complement. So essentially, the clinical gem here, as I said it earlier, the delayed timing or appearance of symptoms is why many people don't realize they have food sensitivities, which can be up to 72 hours. So why would a provider consider the food test, or the FIT test, if you will? Well, here's a couple of scenarios. If your patients don't feel well, if the patient has an autoimmune disease, if that patient has a thyroid problem, if the patient has arthritis, not just rheumatoid, but osteo also, if the patient suffers from brain fog or fatigue, if the patient has any kind of digestive, gut, or skin problems, and lastly, I think sometimes overlooked, if the patient has fibrosis, endometriosis, or even breast cancer. So the question is really, why do nutritionists use it? Well, the immune complex issues and inflammation that can be associated with foods are a true underlying problem for all the conditions that I daily see in my practice 4 days a week, and I assume you see also. Multiple pathway measures are a marker for gut permeability and chemicals and additives, all in this one FIT test. So why is KBMO's approach different? Well, you're looking at the FIT test, formation and technology, showing an enhanced sensitivity. The real difference maker, if you will, is the multiple pathway approach, measuring the adaptive pathway, which is antibodies and exposure, as well as the alternative pathway, measuring inflammation via complement and CD3. This multiple pathway approach allows us as practitioners to zero in on key foods. So typically 5 to 15 foods, enabling us to eliminate the false positives typically seen with just IgG compliance. So let's expand a little bit on a background on the FIT test, KBMO Diagnostics. It was founded in 2004 by Dr. Brent Doville, MIT founder of the Rapid HIV Diagnostic Test. If anybody knows Brent, everybody knows he's a true scientist, and he just, if you will, just loves to get it right. They were granted a patent in 2012. There's the number. Also, ISO 13485 certified quality and FDA registered manufacturing facility. They are the owner of the CD3 cell line. In addition, they also are the first company to achieve specific certifications. And without question, KBMO is growing internationally and nationally as well. So the FIT test originally measured 132 foods, colorings, and additives. I like the finger stick because it enables a quick and easy way to obtain samples. You can also have a serum if you're allowed to draw, if you prefer the draw, but the finger stick for, the chiropractor, some of the naturopaths, etc., or even some of the MDs, sometimes they don't want to draw. The finger stick is quite convenient. The patient report measures leaky gut. Who doesn't want to test for leaky gut? I mean, and we're not at A4M for a dissertation of leaky gut, but we all know that it exists. It won a best-in-class patent patient compliance tools. So let's take a look at what we're testing for here. We're looking for specific food additives. We're looking at different dairy. We're looking at fish. We're looking at grains. We're looking at different meats that are on a high allergy. We're looking at different nuts, plant foods like beans, lectins, if you will, fruits, vegetables, berries in the plant foods, extracts, miscellaneous extracts. And if you'll notice, obviously canola oil, we don't want to consume anyway, the microbiome, shellfish, and different spices that have been shown to be a little high on the food sensitivity chain, if you will. So foods that they test. Now, Take a look at it as this is color coordinated. So we have the Fit 22, which is that dark orange, if you will, almost like a tangerine color. Those are the 22 most common food sensitivities. The Fit 132 is in green, and then it's been expanded and we'll go into specific details and specs of the Fit 176. So the FIT Food Inflammation Test, which is the acronym, finger stick shipping and reporting. So let's go through some quick instructions so everybody's real clear if we have anybody who's curious on how it's done. Use the side of the fingertip or the middle finger or the ring finger of the finger stick. Try not to use the center of the finger as it's the most sensitive area, as you all know. It's always great to warm up a finger. It brings a large amount of blood in a specific area, or if you have to run some hot water. Basically, we haven't had too many patients that have not been able to give us the droplets of water that we need. You clean the site with the finger stick, with a provided alcohol swab, and of course, allow it to air dry. Position the lancet provided over the area. You just cleared and press the lancet firmly into the puncture site. Once it's punctured, set the lancet aside, massage the area. Try and fill in each circle provided with blood. At least 3 circles must be filled, but if possible, you're going to go all 5. Again, in some of the succeeding slides, I will show you what it looks like, the card. Following collection, clean the area, label the collection card with the name and the data, send it into KBMO, and they will analyze the sample, email you a very complete cornucopia type report in 5 to 7 days. And I think other than the accuracy, I think the report as we go through it is really helpful for the doctor, and really helpful for the doctor, again, to explain in the color coordination what the patient has and where they need to go. Anyway, here is the good spot versus what they like to refer to as a rejected spot. So the top part of the slide really shows that these circles are filled out versus the bottom where they kind of just patted it. So please make sure they fill out the whole circle. That's the one addendum that I always like to tell every patient and every doc who's going to start with the foods with the finger stick. So the patient report is most interesting. So some brevity on talking about the patient report. As you see, it's color coordinated. The results will be grouped into 2 lists: restricted food and allowed foods. The restricted foods are those foods which test positive and the patient is sensitive to these foods. The restricted foods should be eliminated from the diet, and a suitable replacement for the food should be used. The allowed foods are those foods which test negative and the patient is not sensitive to these foods. These foods can be eaten without any sensitivity issue. The patient should avoid any food that tests positive, but in the event the highest positives obviously should be the first to be removed. In some cases, the patient has a low reactivity several foods, which are depicted by the bars, which are green light or a 1+. In the latter case, the sum of all the 1+ reactivity may be over the threshold of reactivity, so the patient experiences some symptoms. In this case, the patient should avoid as many of the low reacting positive foods as possible. My little addendum, real simply, is that I take away the +1s also. I don't even count them. I just want to take away all the different sensitivities. I'd rather substitute because we've got a plethora of foods that people can choose from. And when we take a look, we see that the red is a 4 reaction. That's a very common, very highly reactive food. The tangerine, if you will, is more of a +3 reaction. The yellow is a +2, not as high. And then that very, very, very light green or lime, if you will, is the +1. I take them all out. That's kind of just how I do it. So this is the color coordination that I wanted to talk about to really show you what I meant. And the patients love the fact that they can actually visualize it. And obviously it's very easy to explain now. Some tests that we take are just so hard for us to understand, but even harder for us to explain to allow the patient to understand. So here we have another fit test, but now we're adding the additives. I do want to make note about the additives because for me, the additives are a big takeaway. So I do want to spend a couple of quick minutes on the additives. So clearly, if we're looking at aspartame, we'll talk a little bit more about these non-nutrient sweeteners, but aspartame is NutraSweet Equal, benzoic acid, definite negative health effect, can damage the eyes, irritation of the skin, redness, burniness, irritation, nose, throat if inhaled. Where do you find these? They're in perfumes, dyes, topical medications, insect repellents, and believe it or not, it's used as a preservative in food. BHA is used to prevent fats in foods from going rancid, as well as the foaming agent for yeast. I don't think we really need to talk about MSG. Everybody's heard about that. Polysorbate 80 is a soap, a cosmetic, and they use it, believe it or not, as a lubricant in the eyes to help emulsify. It can be considered or a concern because they use it in vaccines. Red number 3 is a synthetic dye with cherry pick stain used in cake decorating on the top gel, candies, popsicles. It's that red that you'll see on a lollipop that'll turn your tongue a specific color. Red 40 is a food dye. Saccharin is good old sweet and low. And yellow 6 is used in tablets and capsules. A little talk about these artificial sweeteners. It's one of the things that I recommend to everybody not to take. So I just want to give a little bit of information, how important this is to mention it to your patients. So we know that metabolic effects of non-nutrient sweeteners are negative. These non-nutrient sweeteners interfere with learned responses that contribute to glucose and energy homeostasis. Sugar and artificial sweetener beverages were shown to increase stroke and dementia by 2 to 3 times. Artificial sweetener beverages in another study showed, again, a higher risk of stroke and dementia. Aspartame has shown to cause weight gain, and it also increased the levels of TNF alpha. Artificial sweeteners are also shown to increase appetite. And maybe the big takeaway is all these artificial sweeteners damage the microbiome, which can lead to impaired glucose intolerance, increased incidence of type 2 diabetes, and those alterations in the gut microbiome have a unfortunate effect throughout the body for deleterious health effects. So a little bit more about why do we care about chemical additives? Gut health is determined by an intact epithelial barrier, as we all know, and balanced gut microbiota. Many studies suggest that some of these food additives, but also food contaminants, as such pesticides and substances migrating from food contact materials, adversely affect the gut barrier, leading to leaky gut and damage to the gut microbiota. So as we get into the FIT test, again, here's another patient report. So what you're seeing with this little arrow looking at Candida, so it also measures leaky gut, probably foods, and elevated Candida. So again, that 3 things that it's testing really allows it to stand out versus other tests. So they have a FIT test meal plan. This is great. Some doctors love it. Other doctors want to make their own. So you always have the option that you can share it with the patient. If not, you don't have to share it, and you can individualize it and do your own personalized lifestyle if you like. So when you take a good look, you're seeing that obviously it's based on that patient's needs, because clearly they're not going to give the foods that they're allergic to. And I like the phone app. I mean, we're now doing things virtually. We're having great responses virtually. Everybody's on their phone. I'm using my phone right now as a timer, so I know what time it is. So what's great is we have this FIT test phone app, so people can get all the information, they can get their diets, and they can communicate via their phone. The zonulin test. So zonulin is a protein that can open the tight junctions. So let's talk a little bit about when the tight junctions get open up and what it all means. Well, again, leaky gut or intestinal permeability. It is a condition in which the lining of the small intestine becomes damaged, causing undigested food particles, toxic wastes, and bacteria to leak through the intestines and flow to the bloodstream. The foreign substances entering the blood can cause an autoimmune response in the body, including inflammatory and allergic reactions, such as, and not limited to, migraines, irritable bowel, chronic fatigue, food sensitivities, rheumatoid arthritis, and more. Importantly, zonulin remains the only modulator of intracellular tight junctions expressed so far that can affect gut function and health and associated immune response, so it is widely investigated. High levels of zonulin have been associated with increased intestinal permeability, as zonulin induces the breakdown of tight junctions between intestinal epithelial cells. Several autoimmune, inflammatory, and neoplastic diseases have been associated with elevated levels of zonulin or the evidence of increased intestinal permeability. So when we say that zonulin increases intestinal permeability, the way I like to describe it with my patients is to think of the lining of the intestines like a cheesecloth. Only tiniest particles should pass through. Zonulin makes the holes of the cheesecloth bigger and allows particles to pass into the bloodstream and through the body. We call this intestinal permeability or increased intestinal permeability or leaky gut. So zonulin is a great protein to test for. And the literature is interesting in that gliadin, the protein, and gluten and intestinal bacteria are the main triggers for excessive zonulin release. And it makes a lot of sense because both having dysbiosis, an unleveling of good and bad bacteria, and you can add LPS, which is an endotoxin, leads to the release of zonulin. The gliadin damages the intestinal barriers, as we all know. It does not matter if we're consuming gluten in North America, whether celiac is quick, non-sensitivity to gluten is also relatively quick, but we know that gluten means glow. It damages the intestinal tract. You add the idea of glyphosate, and you've got this whole cascade of things that are going to damage the gut at the idea of zonulin release. So let's blow up that tight junction a little bit, if you will, and let's take a good look at increased permeability. In a healthy gut, there are several cell junctions and good nutrient absorption. In a leaky gut, however, the villi, your microvilli, your shaggy carpets, which are needed to grab nutrients, are damaged. There's poor absorption and the cell junctions are now loose. So essentially what I tell patients is our tight junction went to a loose junction. This means that bacteria and unwanted items can pass through the gut, as seen in the picture towards the right. Zonulin testing can be performed with the patient's FIT 22 test, FIT 132 test, or FIT 176 test to provide a baseline for zonulin levels. This gives your patients the opportunity to track their progress after implementing an elimination diet, which we'll discuss, based on the FIT test results. So I always recommend testing and retesting. So I'm going to show you my 7R program where we start with a test and we end with a retest. A little overview of zonulin. Zonulin is a protein that is synthesized in intestinal cells and liver cells. It's a key biomarker for intestinal permeability and is the only regulator, interestingly enough, of intestinal permeability that is reversible. Zonulin is one of the 3 ways that the FIT tests can diagnose a leaky gut, along with finding a sensitivity to candida and multiple food sensitivities. It's truly estimated that a large percentage of food sensitivity sufferers have increased intestinal permeability. Zonulin was discovered in 2000 by Dr. Alessio Fasano and his team at the University of Maryland School of Medicine. Elevated levels of zonulin are associated with what's on the slide, briefly autoimmune, celiac, non-celiac gluten sensitivity, rheumatoid arthritis, type 1 diabetes, asthma, inflammatory bowel disease, and more. So let's look at some of the clinical studies because everything that we do, in my opinion, is science-based. So one of my mantras, if you will, is to take the science and bridge it to what I like to refer to as Monday morning application. So our proverbial Monday morning application is to really look at where food sensitivities play with our patient base and how testing with those food sensitivities and more also play with our patient base. So let's take a good look. Here was data on the left and the right side. So take a good look at how high the initial results were. So the data was analyzed for 30 patients tested before and after the elimination diet. And just for a point of sake, the elimination diet is eliminating foods that you know that you are sensitive to. So obviously the elimination diet is taking them away and the reintroduction diet is putting them back in. There is a significant reduction in number of sensitivities reported after the elimination diet, which indicates the FIT test could predict specific food sensitivities. So here was the clinical testing results. You saw a significant improvement in symptoms observed after the elimination diet. Let's take a look of the symptom, the number of patients reporting on the initial test, and the number of patients reporting on the second test. Let's just take a few of these. Let's look at memory and concentration. 22 patients complained about it, only 3 on the second test. That is a precipitous drop. Anxiety, mood, and depression, 20 down to 3. Bloating and stomach pain, because I always ask my patients, do you get gas and bloating after you eat? And many patients say yes. So 18 patients said yes, 2 after the elimination diet. And last, let's just look at fatigue, 18 to 4. Joint pain, I'm a chiropractor. Muscle aches, you're looking at 13 to 1. And one last one, sleep, critical element. It's where our brain detoxes. Sleep is where our gut actually heals. Sleepiness, 12 patients, none after taking the food out. And I think that's one of the hidden gems and where you can get, as I like to always refer to, get the bang for the buck, if you will. IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome. You could also have irritable bowel disease. It's approximately almost 20% of North Americans have been diagnosed with IBS. Also, those estimated with IBS, approximately 25% seek medical care for their symptoms, only 5% seen in tertiary care settings. Though it appears that a percentage of patients seeking medical care for IBS symptoms represents a small percentage of those with IBS, there is a high prevalence of the disorder, resulting in a sizable direct cost in physician visits, emergency room visits, diagnostic tests, and pharmacological treatments. We all know with our functional medicine, functional nutrition approach that we can do a great job, a cost-efficient job with IBS. So here's a study that was done. The study title was very simply put, Evaluating the Health Benefits and Outcomes of IBS and Food Sensitivity using the FIT test, IgG 1 through 4 plus C3D immune complexes. So let's take a look at the results. The results were stellar when you take a good look at these. I'm excited to share these with you. So IBS severity score day 1 to end of study. And here you had the intervention group. The average was 126.8. It decreased in IBS score severity. The control group actually decreased also, but not nearly as much. It was actually 3 to 1 in the intervention group. Homocysteine. Homocysteine, we all know, is a stroke marker. The intervention group decreased 0.5. Unfortunately, the control group average increase was 0.64. There should be a beeping red light there. I should have highlighted that. CRP, C-reactive protein, tissue inflammation, day 1 to end of study. Intervention group had a decrease of 0.47, whereas the control group also had a decrease of 0.10, almost a 5 to 1 change. So clearly, using the intervention and using the specific ideology, those in the intervention group got great results. The data analyzed the results from 100 of these HCP patients randomized to intervention and control groups. Given the limitation of data during the claims lag utilization that's available at this point, here was the takeaways. There was a 10% reduction in hospital stays and visits in the intervention group and a 50% reduction in PCP visits and specialist office in the intervention group. So the clinical outcomes greatly improved compared with IgG, and what Alcott did is a study. So KBMO saw twice the IBS severity score reduction compared with that of Alcott. They had a 50% improvement in IBS severity score compared with IgG alone, really speaking to the clinical efficacy of the test. So there's more to come. Patients to be followed post 12 months of active participation in the study to gather more data on burden of illnesses of IBS patients, also for more insight into health economies and clinical outcomes. The total cost of care with the cost of intervention will be analyzed to calculate an ROI, and I hope an RROI, a recurring return on investment. So FIT test conclusions. Real simple, manufactured using ISO 1385 quality system in an FDA registered facility to ensure quality, reliability, and reproducibility. Patented multi-pathway detection technology broadly adapted, best-in-class patient compliance tools, excellent clinical outcomes backed by IRB approved clinical studies. So what's so different and great about this test? That's the thing I get every time I talk about it. That's the question that the patients ask. Here's my answer. The main advantage that the FIT test offers is that it screens for IgG types 1 through 4. Most IgG testing only looks at 1 to 2 types, and more importantly, screens for something called complement. When it comes to generating inflammation, complement is even more important than the levels of IgG response to a food. So let's say that the initial IgG reaction is the fire alarm going off at the fire station and the first responders showing up at the scene. Complement is like the rest of the squad showing up to help handle the situation. They show up a bit later, but often create much larger hubbub at the scene of the accident or fire. The alarm IgG had to sound in the first place to trigger the chain of events, but the responding teams, i.e. the complement, were really what caused the biggest stir in the end. Foods that activate complement can cause both local and systemic destruction of tissue by increasing inflammation. Essentially, you have 10 or more foods with a significant IgG reaction, but the ones with complement are the ones that are most significant in terms of boosting your inflammatory response. Knowing this information confirms which foods are most important to eliminate. No other food sensitivity test currently screens for IgG 1 through 4 and complement levels. And guess what? Now we've added the leaky gut component. So the FIT test also tests for leaky gut. So you don't need a second test. If you show up as having a positive candida, it doesn't mean you have candida overgrowth. Candida is present in everybody's gut, as we all know, but typically in low amounts. A positive reaction to candida means that it's getting through the gut barrier where it can present, unfortunately, to your immune system. This confirms the presence of leaky gut, the higher reaction level. Generally, the worse the leaky gut. Having a high number of food reactions also suggests leaky gut. And this is essentially the best part of the blood spot panel. You're mixing the 3 pathways. And finally, new products developed by world-class scientists and physicians. So now we're looking at the new FIT 132, the COVID-19 antibody test, FIT 176, Zonulin, and the FAST test. These are all new products that I will go through a quick little detail as we move ahead. The new FIT test. Well, what they did was they've added and removed specific things. They've removed safflower seed, cottonseed, squash mix, kola nut, and catfish, but added some of the more commonly seen food sensitivities, which are butternut squash, sea bass, quinoa, lamb, and whey. Now we look at the COVID-19 antibody test, and I can tell you this was hot for a while. People still want to know if they have antibodies, and they want to know the level of their antibodies. So I was using this test an awful lot. So the COVID-19 test, as we all know, antibodies, IgM, they come out in the first 14 days, IgG. So it's a great marker to ascertain where your immune system was, where your immune system is, and I still use this test regularly in my office. The new 44 foods for the 176. So again, there were added foods. So those added foods, as you see, are in the dairy, grains, fruit, beans, vegetables, additives, spices, fish, meats, extracts, nuts, shellfish, and seeds. So it's more robust testing. You get up to 176 foods to see if you have a sensitivity. You're really going to find things. I think in some tests, we don't look broad enough, and we all just test, if you will, the gluten and the dairy and the such. So next, General Zonulin. They're going to be launching that. I think actually we're going into October on this. So Zonulin, measuring zonulin protein, not antibodies, etc. Test format, great. Blood spot or serum. So essentially, I'm very proud to announce they have the DREAM development team. They're combining Dr. Alessio Fasano, who discovered Zonulin, and he's partnering with KBMO, and Dr. Brent Dorval, who is the developer of the first rapid HIV test. All FIT tests will include Zonulin as soon as they launch. So the FAST test, that's an in-office test. Dr. Dorval was known for the rapid test of HIV. Bottom line here is within a moment, you're going to be able to test. And for me, this is exciting. Somebody comes in and I can test them for egg, wheat, and milk right then and there in place. Don't have to send it out, shake it up, and find out if someone has a food sensitivity. So for doctors of chiropractic, naturopaths, osteopath practitioners, this is a quick test. So many patients, how many times have you given a prescription or a script to somebody and said, all right, let's go do this, or even just drawing the blood and having it tested. This is a quick test to get them responding in a positive manner. So here we have the formation of immune complexes and activation of C3 and the generation of IC-C3D and the inflammatory peptides C3A and C5A. So for me, the most effective clinical outcomes across all disease spectrums can result from the normalization of gut function. We know that more than 2/3 of patients have symptoms of diseases that are gut related. So this is where we meet the outside world and we can often manifest the most physiological change. So for me, the bottom line is, when in doubt, start with the gut. I added this in. As we all know, food sensitivities can cause GI barrier breakdown. So intestinal breakdown is associated with adipose tissue inflammation. So we need therapeutic strategies to help ameliorate intestinal barrier function. We know that the brain is the brain. We know the gut is the second brain. It's the second brain because it has its own nervous system, and it's called the enteric nervous system. That enteric nervous system has more nerve cells than any other system, and it communicates with the vagus nerve, which, if we had more time, I'd love to go into detail. So the vagus nerve communicates, it senses what's going on because it attaches to the outside of the transverse colon, what's going on in the microflora and the microbiome inside the gut, and it sends afferent fibers to the brain. And the idea of the gut being the second brain is because that the gut and the brain communicate in a bidirectional manner. So I really wanted to break down. I found these to be extremely evocative in that the small little green balls are digested particles and the big green balls are undigested food particles. If you see the tight junction in toe, you'll see that the undigested food particles cannot pass and they will just be dispensed with. So you have healthy cell junctions, you have healthy villi, good absorption. And as you see, the undigested food particles do not pass, but the digested food particles, as is the gut's purpose, does pass to get to the bloodstream. Whereas conversely, you have damaged cell junctions, damaged villi and poor absorption. You'll see both digested and undigested food particles pass because of the damage to the gut. What should be a pristine looking gut, which is not, passing and stimulating the inflammatory process. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to go into vast detail on this slide, but the bottom line is what you're seeing here is the concept of biodiversity consolidates the importance of the microbiome and the link to immune regulation and brain function. So you're seeing a decline in biodiversity. You're getting microbial deprivation, disturbed immune response, microbial imbalance, higher risk of inflammation. And now you're seeing the idea of this urban life, leaving more cities, getting more chemical environmental toxins, leading you down a slippery slope, leading you down a more detrimental health path. And in that health path, you're damaging your gut. And again, your gut's communicating with your brain, having all this type of inflammation. So what do you do? And we're going to spend a few more minutes and then I'm going to open it up for questions. So when you take a good look, you're seeing my Dr. Rob's Gut Matrix. For me, this could be the whole webinar, but I just want to signify that we all know what the gut should do. We see that when you have food sensitivities, you can lead yourself down a path of a damaged gut. Now, your gut or the toxins in your gut communicate with your liver. 75% of the toxins get to your liver via the bloodstream. 25% of your toxins from your gut get to your liver via the portal vein. Food sensitivities will damage the gut lining, leading you down an increased path of more toxins. So there's a gut to liver pathway also that can be damaged just from some food sensitivities. And the real question is, did the food sensitivities cause the gut problem or did the gut cause the food sensitivities? I'm not really sure what came first, the chicken or the egg. I just need to know that I have food sensitivities. I need to start finding out if we have leaky gut. I need to fix the problem. If we have an increased leaky gut, we have an increased incidence of blood sugar problems, insulin resistance, increased body compositions and obesity. People are more corpulent. So as we know in North America, we're just too heavy. We're seeing that in the epidemic and the pandemic during this COVID-19. People who are obese, they have too many ACE2 receptors in their fat cells. This poses a problem. Why aren't we getting to the center, the epicenter of health? Why aren't we getting to gut health? Increased leaky gut, increased autoimmunity. As we all know, gluten damages the thyroid. For me, a personal note, the musculoskeletal system, leaky gut, increased release of cytokines, increased release of matrix metalloproteinase, your body's own proteolytic enzymes, leads you down a path of increased arthritis, joint pain, and soft tissue injury, gut to brain, brain to gut, as I indicated before. This particular slide really illuminates what we were saying before. A leaky and an inflamed gut leads to damage in the mucosal membrane cells, leading to an increase of toxins in the bloodstream, leading to an immune condition, ultimately leading to nutrient malabsorption, autoimmunity, food intolerances, food sensitivities, blood-brain barrier breaches, and systemic inflammation. We all know the gut-to-brain connection is getting to the root cause of a broken brain. So one of my big terms I like to use is gut on fire means brain on fire. Brain on fire means gut on fire. Whatever you eat and do to your gut, you do to your brain. Whatever you eat and do to your brain, you do to your gut. And whatever you do to your gut, you do to your blood-brain barrier. So food sensitivities damage your gut, ultimately may damage your blood-brain barrier. So you really want to control blood-brain barrier development and permeability. Your blood-brain barrier filters 400 miles of blood and protects your brain. If you pass your gut, if something passes your gut, you have your immune system that can come and attack it and possibly squelch it. If it passes your blood-brain barrier, it's open season on brain tissue. So let me take a minute or two and talk about what we could do to help ameliorate somebody's food sensitivities and or leaky gut. So I'd like to adhere and talk about my 7R action plan. Number one, reset. Reset what? Reset diet, lifestyle, mindset. Let's individualize the right food. A great point of individualizing the food is knowing what people are sensitive to, which diet is right. Get them to exercise. What kind of exercise? Remove. And I would love to say in beeping red lights, remove the trigger. Foods can be a trigger. Foods are a potentiator for inflammation. Foods are a potentiator for inflammation. Let's remove all the foods, and you do so with that FIT test. And then you remove your unwanted pathogens with specific berberines, cerebrobovine immunoglobulins, garlic, and oregano oil and the like. You then want to move to phase 3, which is replace. You want to replace needed digestive enzymes and stomach acids like pepsin and bile and the like. You then, and this is maybe one of the biggest, the two biggest phases in the R's are remove, clearly, and regenerate. You want to regenerate damaged intestinal mucosa, if you will, heal and seal that tight junction lining. You're going to do that with a large amount of different nutrients that are pointed at a anti-inflammatory environment in the gut, and some that will help with the mucosal lining. Then you want to re-inoculate with what we call pre and probiotics to allow for what we call a proper postbiotic. Then 6, you want to reintroduce. How are you going to reintroduce? Well, yes, you can just reintroduce the food. I suggest retest and then reintroduce the foods that were removed from part 2. And last but not least, you always want to retain your health and your GI integrity. Always put people on a good diet, multivitamin, fish oil, vitamin D, probiotic, and the such. So just before we open it up, I see that we have some questions. If you're interested in trying the FIT test, I spoke to the CEO, James White, and he said he will give a 50% discount if you quote Dr. Silverman 8-4M lunch presentation. FIT 132 is $150 down from $275. FIT 176 is $200 from $375. Zonulin is only $75 if you want to add it from $150. You can run it at the same time with the FIT. Your contact information is very simply info@kbmodiagnostics.com or call 617-990-5714. One quickie, my book's coming out 2021 January, Superhighway to Health, 7 Steps to Optimizing the Gut-Brain Connection. Please flag it. Jim Rome, A Personal Fab. Take care of your body. It's the only place you have to live. I'm opening up for questions. If you need to follow me, I've got a big social media. It's all right there for you on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Silverman. As a reminder to all of our attendees, please feel free to submit any questions you may have into the Q&A box. Our first question came in, can this test be used in children as well?
Yes, it can be used in children. For me, and again, you can get some clarification. You can call that number and email and speak to James and Brent. I use it for people over 10, but they may have some other information to expand it to even a younger age.
Wonderful, thank you. If the patient has already removed suspected reactive foods, does the FIT test still pick up those sensitivities?
You know, that is the most commonly asked question. It's great to ask that question. So the answer is yes. And here's the other question, most interestingly enough. They say, hey, I know that I had a food sensitivity to food A, and I took out food A. Do I now have to eat food A to see if I'm sensitive? And the question is, you don't have to eat food A, test anyway. So if you're sensitive to, gluten, let's say, I don't need you to put it in there for me to test. The test will show it. What was the code for the test again? Can we call online? You don't mind if I go back and there we go. So there's the code. It's Dr. Silverman A4M lunch presentation. On the right there, you can contact KBMO via email and or phone. And if you have any questions for me, that's how you can get in touch with me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much again, Dr. Silverman, for an excellent presentation.